We'll get started here in 1 minute. I hope you all enjoyed the Cigna mindfulness break. Now I want to introduce our keynote speaker. She is a connector, diplomat, and organizational development architect with more than 25 years of experience positively impacting organizations in the public and private sector. She is an ICMA member whose career path includes serving as a leadership development instructor in the U.S. Air Force and developing numerous training programs at the City of Phoenix. Please welcome June Mighty.
Well, thank you. And I want to say good morning and good afternoon from the West Coast here. It's morning. If you're on the East Coast, it's pretty much afternoon. So wherever you are, welcome to this session. And so I want to get started first with a quote from Aristotle as we get into this presentation on hope. And one of the things that Aristotle says on the topic of hope is that hope is a awakening dream. And that can be interpreted in so many different ways. But the way that I look at it is that when we talk about the topic of hope, hope sort of gives meaning and life to your dreams. You wake up every morning from a dream and a new day dawns. And for me, that's kind of hope. So I like that in terms of hope is awakening dream. And so with that, I'm going to start our topic on leading with hope, a key to navigating ambiguity and resilience. Notice I didn't say the key, it's just a key, one of the attributes that I think is necessary. The other thing that I want to share with you, even before we get into this, is that this topic of hope is not something, although I've been in leadership development and done a variety of different things, it's not something that I just came about or just discovered. This is something that's really, when I say been on my heart, even as a kid, you know, one of the things that happened with me as a child, I would always look around. And I remember when I say a child, I'm talking about 8, 9 or so, and looking around at the adults around me. And most of them didn't really seem happy, you know, and I wasn't really gung-ho about becoming an adult because it just didn't seem like a great experience. So many challenges, so many different adversities. And so one of the things that I had always held dear to my heart is that I said to myself then, if I continue to live, I wanted to be able to give people hope. I wanted to be able to give people a reason for get up in the morning. And so it's behind that backdrop that I speak this topic as well. So welcome to the presentation this morning, which for some particular reason is not advancing. Already I am having some technical challenges. But one of the next thing, even as I move forward on this, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. And there we have it. I want to tell you a little bit about myself, and that is, I have one daughter. Her dad calls her the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. My mom lives in India. She's been living there for over 20 plus years. My dad lives in the UK. He's lived there longer than I've been alive. And I love to travel. I love to hang out with my sisters. And when I say my sister, I have one sister in particular who loves to travel. And so I'm leaning on her here. We were on our way from Marrakesh to Casablanca, and we were exhausted. So that's me leaning on my sister, and that's my mom, and I have some friends, you know, we were hanging out in India in 2019. Thank goodness we had the opportunity to participate in that trip at that point. So with that as a backdrop and just understanding my story just a little bit as it relates to hope. Before we get into the topic a little bit further, I want to give you another quote by Martin Luther King that says, "Everything that is done in the world is done by hope." And so with that being said, we're going to talk a little bit about the perceptions and the definition of hope. We will then also talk about the definition of resilience. But then we will look at some simple, what I think call simple steps, and yet not always easy. So let me not undersell that. The steps that we can take in terms of moving forward to resilience, some hopeful steps we can take to move forward to resilience. So one of the things here is that when people sometimes think about hope, I always get the impression of a wet noodle. And you will understand this when you hear what I say. It's like you will share with someone something that you feel really gung-ho about, or something that you think is really possible. And you will share with them some information, and they will say, well, oh, I hope that works out for you. And when people say that, you always get the impression that they don't really think it's going to work out. You know, they don't, just by the tone of their voice. So I hope that works out for you. And so a lot of times when the word hope is used, it's used in a way that just sounds wishy-washy. It's a wish. It may come to pass, it may not. But I say that hope is a lot firmer than that. Hope focuses on what's concrete. I see there's this song about hope that talks about, I like to look at it as a solid rock. There's this song, and I'm not a singer, so I wouldn't sing it for you, but it says, solid as a rock. That's the name of the song. And so when I think of hope, I think of that's something solid. And you will probably say, well, June, how does that really equate to a rock-like substance? Well, let me tell you just a little bit how I got there, right? When you look at the Greek definition for hope, it says it's a confident expectation of good. That's it in a general sense. Confident expectation of good. You are confidently looking forward to something good. Then in terms of some researchers, when there's not always a concise and definitive explanation for resilience, and there are different definitions of hope, as you're going to see here. But as I look at some researchers and the way that they defined it, they define hope really in terms of a fundamental way of creating a path forward. You're looking at strategies, developing strategies to move forward, to accomplish your goals, being optimistic. Fundamentally, that's what hope is, creating a path forward. Creating a path forward confidently, expecting good things to happen. So what I'm doing here is combining two different definitions. Create a path forward, confidently expecting good things to happen. That's, ladies and gentlemen, really is hope. And so if you're not expecting something good, and that can be the case because based on what has happened with us this last year, we are coming up, at least for us in my organization, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary where everyone, not everyone, because everyone wasn't able to, but a lot of our staff pivoted and went to remote workforce because of COVID-19. And so there's crises. We have a host of things that are happening that can affect our ability to hope. We have had all last year, and this year we have the COVID-19 experience. Last year, I've frequently read about the 60s and the things that happened with Blacks in America in the 60s. But this time I had an opportunity to live through one of the greatest, what I call civil rights, social unrest experiences of my life. And what made it so profound for me is when you look at other countries like New Zealand that's having marches surrounding this topic, you know that you have touched a chord, right? And then we had this election process that took place in November, unlike anything I've ever experienced before. You may have seen something like it before, but this was like unlike anything that has transpired for me. And then we come into this year in January, and then there's a situation that happened at our nation's capital. Not that there's anything wrong with people marching and protesting and speaking, standing up for what they believe in, but the aspect of going in the building and what took place and what transpired there, I wondered to myself, what is going on? I felt like, oh my gosh, and I actually said it to myself, this is the Twilight Zone. This is what that looks like. So we have all those things. In our counties, in our cities, we have individuals who have been affected. One of the things that when we did our press conferences, we heard a lot about domestic violence was on the rise as a result of the COVID-19 situation. There were suicides, there were a host of things that were transpiring, affecting people. A lot of negativity and people being infected and people dying. We already know these things. But there were also, in the midst of all of this, there was glimmers of hope. I would be going for a walk, getting out of the house. And I remember on one instance, I actually walked up the hill and there was a family, a grandmother, mom, and a daughter. They were sitting at the kitchen table. It was a little girl. And I remember just looking, because the windows were up. So I remember just looking in, glimpsing, and then looking away. And I thought that was so cool, just sitting there at the kitchen table. I also saw on my walk, there were little girls actually doing like what the hopscotch on the sidewalk using chalk. There were kids out who were playing. There were kids in the backyard playing games outside and not cooped under the house or on some type of technology. Family members talking more about playing games and connecting and having good times together. So in the midst of all of that, there was also some glimmers of hope. There's a glimpse of hope. So hope, just as I leave this section moving towards resilience, again, I just want to reiterate a confident expectation of something good. So regardless of everything that we are experiencing, and we are experiencing a lot, what good things are you hoping for? What good things am I hoping for? Because in order for us to lead our teams effectively, in order for us to lead our counties and our organization, in order for us to deal with all the ambiguity, uncertainty, fear, the confusion, and the challenges we're facing as public sector leaders, we have to have hope that there's going to be something better for our communities ahead. So as I transition, I look at the word anything, and I'm going to share with you another quote. And it says, listen to the mustn'ts, child. Listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, and then listen to me. Anything is possible, child. Anything can be. So anything is possible for us if we are able to have hope, if we're able to craft a way forward, if we've set together some goals and strategies to move to what would be the next best step towards resilience. Here, of course, we have summer, winter, and fall. No matter what happens in life, the seasons will come and they will go. And so we're here in spring, and the spring resembles the ability, it literally for me resembles resilience. And resilience simply means having the capacity to overcome adversity, to overcome fear, to overcome trials, everything, those things that we're facing now, and the devastation and the hurt. I had a family member close to me, we've talked about, and my daughter said this to me, Mommy, we have people that I've known who have been infected with COVID, who have had loved ones who passed away as a result of COVID. And you can empathize with it. But when her dad just recently, not only was in the hospital as a result of COVID-19, but also had to go through a major brain surgery simultaneously, all at the same time. We understood what it was like to deal with the stress and the weight of it all, to have a loved one who is in a hospital that you simply cannot see. You're navigating everything virtually, you're talking to nurses, and she navigated this beautifully because he's my ex-husband. I'm here in California. They are in Phoenix, and she navigated this beautifully in so many ways. But the stress of it all, the weight of it all, it was unreal. And it was challenging for our family and also for our friends, but we made it through it. made it through the surgery, made it through everything. And we are more resilient for it as a result of it. So it's about, and also about the mindset and the disposition that we have. So it takes hope to be able to get to the area of resiliency. There has to be something that you see beyond yourself. There has to be some vision, more vision for your organization, something that your heart and your soul literally buys into. It's something that you see that others may not agree with, but somewhere deep in your core, you know this is doable and you are headed towards that. So when we talk about leading with hope, one of the things that we have to consider, and you have to consider as a leader, most important is what's taking place between your ears. What do you think about everything that we're experiencing? How do you feel about it? What are you saying to your colleagues, to your staff, to your friends, to your family members? That is really important, because the people around you will pick up the energy of what it is that you are saying, especially your staff. So you could say to your staff that everything is going to work out, but sometimes the intonation of your voice, just like I gave you that first example, the intonation of your voice may give you away. What it is that you're doing will give you away. You may say that everything is going to work out, but how are you behaving? Are you acting and behaving as if everything is going to work out? Because later on, when I'm going to share with you some stories about individuals who've inspired me to continue to be hopeful. And a lot of times we don't capture things by what people tell us. We capture it by what they do. Same thing with children. We'll tell our children, you've seen a situation where a parent will say to a child, okay, you shouldn't do that. But then the parent themselves actually do something. One example would be is that you have your child, a toddler. Toddlers will give you away. So you have a toddler, and the toddler just starts to curse. And the parent is in the midst of people, and the parent is shocked, and you can see their eyes open up like mine, probably not as big as mine, but they're shocked and like, you can't say that. But you say it. And so they capture what it is that you do. And likewise, the staff is the same way. Not that we're children, but we pick up on whether or not you're really willing to lead with hope and whether or not you believe what you say. So do you believe what you say? What are you thinking? The other thing is, have you really created a vision that brings alignment to the organization? A lot of times our departments function in silos, or organization function in silos. Everyone has their own kingdom and they want to rule. But really, there should be an alignment to an overall vision of the organization. Yes, of course, every department, HR has its own function and different things that it does. Fire is different in what it does, but we still have a common goal and a common objective as it relates to our organization and the communities that we serve. So what is that alignment? And you may think it exists, but I dare you to go to your staff and to your frontline staff and others and really ask them if they know what that is. That's where the rubber really meets the road. Just because you think there's alignment doesn't mean there is. The other thing that you can do on a much closer basis is something that I did when we were coming into the new year. It was a small group of us on my immediate team. And we physical distancing, masked up and everything. But what we did was a visioning activity, because we did one in 2019 and it worked out really great and saw some really great results. And so one team member, what I can remember, one team member did an individual visioning exercise, and their focus was on excellence. Another team member's focus was on growth. Mine was on faith. What now I did, taking the individual visions that they want to see and what they want to accomplish within the next year, along with our vision for our division in terms of creating a learning environment, creating a learning environment, and aligning it and thinking it through in terms of what we want for our department and what we want for our county. Thinking all that through, I started to connect the dots, and then thinking in terms of, in what ways can I help these individual contributors to align their vision and their goals with what it is that we're doing. How can I help one person to grow and realize that they've grown? So at the end of December this year, will they have grown? Will the other have achieved the excellence that they wanted to achieve? Will I have walked the level of faith that I thought I wanted to walk? So I sort of connect those together. And then, of course, we know this, but sometimes because of the demands of our schedules, and it's very real, we don't always take time to connect those things. And then bringing the team together in some way, shape, or form, whether you team them, you Zoom them, or however it can be done, to create a unique and a united vision for your department or for your specific group. So that is one of the things that I would say in terms of leading with hope. The other thing, as we move into this more closely, is the idea of building relationships. What are your relationships like? You need to build stronger relationships and networks to help us navigate this environment, to create that path forward. And then, of course, there's the juggling act. Every project manager knows that when you plan a project and you put in together the project schedule, the tasks, the milestones, we know that things are going to change and that we have to be willing to adjust. So make the plans, but adjust. This now then brings me to the topic of proximity. And this became near and dear to my heart because I listened to a speaker, Brian Stevenson, in 2017. He did a talk on leading in uncomfortability that literally shook me, shifted me, changed the way that I think about the things that I was doing at the time. And he talked about the fact that sometimes we create these narratives. We create narratives, but we're operating from a distance. And so he talked about it's in proximity that we're able to see the nuances. Nothing, ladies and gentlemen, is black or white. Not necessarily. There's so many shades of gray and blue and browns and mocha and all these different things. So we can't just look at it as if it's a black and white situation, because a lot of times that's not always the case. So are you in proximity of the situations? When was the last time you really got out and looked at your community and drove around your community? There are a couple of examples I want to share with you when I say that. A couple of years ago, I was out and I went out for lunch. And so I was walking and I came close to a park, and there were some homeless people in the park. And there was this one gentleman that was right close in my space where I was walking. And he had there were like, his eyes were semi shut, and there were some flies flying around him. And he was sitting in a wheelchair. And I have to be honest, yes, I was probably going to go a different direction. But something in me kept telling me to don't ignore him, go right by and talk to him. And I was afraid, because I said to myself, I don't know, what am I going to say to this man? How do I talk to him? But there was just this prompting. So I walked up to the gentleman who had his eyes semi-closed, and I said to him, I said, have you eaten? And he said, no. And so then the money that I had for lunch, I just gave him everything that I had. And I said, get yourself some lunch. And I started to walk off. And then he said to me, you're not from around here, are you? And I kind of looked back at him, and I to this day, I'm like, what does that really mean? He said, you're not from around here. And I'm like, what does that mean? But I didn't bother to explore. He started to talk to me and engage me in conversation that he wanted to know where he could go to get something to eat. And I directed him. And then I had to get back to the office. But I stopped, although reluctantly, to be in proximity, because in my line of work, I'm a public servant. He is the community that I serve. We serve him. And so that was important for me to do, to follow that prompting. The other thing is that when we're onboarding our staff to their new roles, sometimes we fail to connect the dots to the community. We have to, whether we're in IT, whether or not we are in HR, or wherever else we may be, auditor, controller, wherever we are, it's not just those who are working in parks and working in street transportation who interact with the community, right? And these are just some examples. But we have to connect the dots. We have to let them know how it is what we do is in the best interest of the community. We really are here to serve the common good. evolve. That's what we're here to do. And yes, I know that it's difficult. And yes, I know that things are sort of nasty on the national and also on the local level when we look at our politicians and everything that is taking place. But still, the overall objective is to serve the common good of the communities that we serve. And so therefore, you need to know what they look like. You need to know who they are. And the people who are supposedly serving them should also be well acquainted with these individuals, right? So proximity is important because it will influence the decisions that we make. So now there also has to be a path forward. And when I talk about the path forward here, what I'm going to talk about is inspiration. So we talk about hope. We talk about hope, really confident expectation of good things to happening, and then creating the goals and the strategies and everything to get there so that we can be resilient. Because without those strategies, without that type of mindset that there can be something better, how then can you be resilient? There's no sense that that word will not exist. And resiliency, if negative things never happen, there's no need to be resilient. So what we have to do is sort of, the path forward is sort of to normalize adversity. It may not have happened or experienced in the way that it's been before, but we have to somehow normalize it so people are not afraid of adversity, and so that we can indeed be creative, because that is one thing that adversity brings. It brings the opportunity to create something new, something out of nothing, or to redesign in a totally different way. So the path forward, it needs that. But it also requires some inspiration, some personal inspiration. So what I'll do, I'll start out with this gentleman here, Jerome E. Miller. Was a deputy city manager. I used to work at the city of Phoenix, and at the time I worked there, was a deputy city manager. He's now passed on, and it happened in 2013, and it's sometimes hard for me still to talk about him. But one of the things that he was very passionate about, he was very passionate about the community. I used to work in HR, and I received a promotion, and my promotion led me to the neighborhood services department. And I learned a lot of things in neighborhood services department. This was where I learned about really serving community. One, Jerome taught me, he mentored me. And one of the things that he taught me, he said, June, you analyze too much sometimes. You have to learn to bounce back faster. He said, you're bouncing back, but you got to come back faster. And so I remember that, because even now he's no longer with me. In some respects, his presence is with me. And every time I encounter a level of adversity, I remember that, come back faster, June, come back faster. And at the times when I come back faster, I will stop and I will say, wow, I wish you were here, because I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Come back, bounce back faster. I not only want to bounce back, but bounce beyond, because that is being resilient. The other thing he taught me was about control. I came from HR, moved into neighborhood services. I was doing training and development. So I thought I knew my stuff. And there was an issue with mobile vending, day labor. There was a host of issues that I had not dealt with before, because I was dealing with employee development. And in this, I had to get input from neighborhood leaders. Neighborhood leaders are telling me how and what should be put into my training program. And I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to that. So I had a conversation with Jerome, and he taught me something. He said to me, he said, June, he said, do you have a home? And I said, yeah, I have a house. He said, you have a mortgage? And I said, yeah, I have a mortgage. He said, so do you own the home? I said, yeah, I live in it. Yeah, I own my home. He said, June, do you really own your home? Is the mortgage paid off? I said, no. So he said, really, the bank owns the home. And until you pay it off, you don't really own it. And I said, well, yeah. He said, June, you don't own this. You're a steward of it. You don't own it. And I've got to tell you, that happened back in the early 2000s. And still today, the man has passed on, but still today, that's a part of me. So when I serve, a lot of times I'm thinking, I don't own this. I'm a steward of what I do. I'm a steward of the services. I'm a steward in terms of the people that I serve and the people that I lead, but I don't own anything. And it helps me when I think I'm in control. The next individual I'll share with you is a gentleman by the name of Tim Tiller. Tim Tiller is still with me. But Tim, these gentlemen led by example. They inspired me to greater things, and this is what we also have to do to the individuals that we lead and that are around us and our colleagues. A couple of things Tim did that I want to highlight here is this. He would walk around every morning, come to our doors, and in my office, he would stick his head in and was like, "Hey, how are you doing?" He would be just passing through to say hello. And I watched him do this over and over again. I'm like, why does he do that? But in actuality, I kind of like the fact that he walked around the building and said hello to everybody. And I found that once I left the organization we were working in, and I got promoted to a senior manager role in another organization, I too would go in early enough to look at my schedule, to get my cup of hot tea, and make rounds, not only in my area, but I would literally go to the next building that I had no staff and literally walk around just to say hello to people, just to connect the dots. And people would wonder why I did that, but he taught me the importance of people and the importance of connection. The other way that he did this was we went to a conference in Baltimore. We were on our way back. There were three of us, three colleagues. I was in the middle. We were sitting in the airport. And he said, "June, I want you to be part of the fund committee." And yes, there was such a thing as a fund committee. The organization I was working in had a fund committee. And when you think about a fund committee, just think about employee engagement. That's what it was. And he was a chief operations officer. And I didn't say this to him, but I thought it. I thought to myself, you're out of your cotton picking mind. Do I look like a fun committee kind of person? But he had this look as if he was giving me a challenge. And I saw it and I couldn't back down from the challenge. I just couldn't. I took it. But I negotiated that I would only serve the fund committee for a year. And so at the end of that year, what we would normally do is, again, think of employee engagement. We would have an event. And the employees would also invite their spouses or others to be with them at this event. Something happened to me that had never happened to me before, and that blew my mind. So we have all these people, we're eating, and before I sat down to eat, I literally got up and went to every table and spoke to every individual at the table, just walking through. If they had a loved one or guest or whoever, I met them, talked to them, and made my way back to my seat and sat down and thought to myself, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. He saw me and looked at me and like, oh my gosh. It was about getting me out of my comfort zone. It was about helping me to lead and connecting with people on a totally different level. And I've never forgotten that. And I think that's important. So we need inspiration because guess what? We will have programs, we will design programs. Someone else will come along and change it. We will build infrastructure, some maybe we're around for a long time, but there are different things that we will do that people will come along and they will change it. But when we impact each other, when we inspire people in a way that these gentlemen inspire me to value my community, to value input from my community, inspire me to connect with my team and with those who I lead, that never leaves. That's just something that just doesn't leave. It stays with you. Both of these gentlemen at different points in my life gave me the same book. I had a significant birthday and Jerome gave me Oh, the Places You Will Go by Dr. Seuss. When I was leaving the organization that we worked in, Tim Tiller gave me the same book. They inscribed different things. Jerome just reminded me that there are great places that I will be going, and he inspired me to continue to grow. Tim reminded me of the same thing, and he also inspired me to continue to keep the faith and to always overcome and to stay grounded. Two gentlemen, two different stages of my life, years apart. They didn't know each other, but they connected the dots. They saw something in me. And I think we have to be able to see something in others as well, because that's part of being hopeful. Now, hope requires bravery. There are a lot of things happening in our communities right now. There is no clear path forward. I'm not going to minimize this. There is no clear path forward at times, but you need the right people around you, the right people to speak life into you, to encourage you to be brave, to take that next step as a leader. The right people who will get you out of your head and say you're over analyzing, stop it and move forward, make a step. What is the next best step? Take it, do it. The right people who will say to you, June, don't be afraid of taking the next step. You can course correct, because here's the beauty of it, right? Here's the beauty. Even if you're taking a trip, I remember one time I was leaving out of LA to go back to Phoenix for Thanksgiving. I wanted to leave early because I anticipated that there would be a lot of traffic. But the individuals I was driving with, they weren't ready. So we left later than what I actually wanted to. And guess what happened? Yes, you can guess it. Traffic like never before. It took us probably 2 additional hours to get to Phoenix. We were worn out by the time that we got there. But we didn't stop. We didn't decide to turn around and just come back to LA. We kept going. We had to detour. We had to take some pit stops, but we kept going. And this is what it is in terms of bravery. Bravery just means, you take the next best step. You try to get the information, the right type of information. You make the decision with the best amount of information possible that you have at the time, and you move forward. You do the course correction wherever necessary. You surround yourself with great people, not those who are just going to tell you how good you are, but those who sometimes will tell you just where you are missing it. I got to tell you, I'm challenged, and I acknowledge this. If I believe that, and no, not only believe, but if you have demonstrated to me that you really don't like me and that you really don't care for me, when you try to give me advice, more than likely I won't listen, because I just won't. But that's a blind spot for me, because regardless of whether you like me or not, regardless of whether, it doesn't matter. There could be something of value that you have to say that I probably should listen to. So I have to filter that. And so I'm getting better. It's whether or not someone likes me, whether or not I find they have demonstrated that they're somewhat vindictive in the way that they approach things, whether or not they're part of the sort of the nasty group, the way that people are behaving and treating each other these days, whether or not there could be some kernel of truth that they have to say. And I have to dispense my personal feelings about them to get to that kernel of truth. And I'm not saying it's easy, because what I'm doing now, I'm sharing with you that this is a challenge for me, but I'm saying that it's a necessity for us to be able to do somewhat of a 360 and get a good as much perspective as possible. Because what we need, even when it comes to hope and resilience, is perspective taking. We can no longer move with blinders on, but we have to look around us and do some perspective taking to make the next best step forward, to be brave, to be courageous. I want to set up the next slide for you as I get ready to end this session. I think they're actually crows in this tree, but I just say they're birds because at the time I didn't know what they were. But for me, they demonstrated resilience in action. So I was on the phone talking to a friend of mine. I was sitting in the Costco parking lot, and it was a windy day, and we were expecting a storm, and everything is blowing around us, et cetera, et cetera. And I was talking to this friend, and we were talking about COVID-19. We were talking about adversity and trials, and I was trying to encourage her. And I was saying to her, I said, look, I said, so many times in my life, you have encouraged me, you've encouraged me. And she used to say something to me. She said, she used to come by sometimes when she saw that I was down, and she said, You can't be stopped. I'm just coming by to encourage you, to let you know how great you are. And she would say different things, even so much so that I actually at one point encapsulated some of the things that she said in a poem. So she was always an encourager, motivating me to keep moving forward, to keep that hope, to create those plans to get to the next step, because they knew and she knows that I have places that I need to go. And I say that a lot of times, even to some of the people that I work with. Look, I got places to go, people to see, things to do. So let's get with it here, because there are places to go, there are things to do. But resilience has been this awesome journey. And I want you to watch this as these birds just navigate the wind. These birds are going with the flow. They are just perched up here. This one right above my head here. They are just perched. I just happened to look up and I saw that. And I thought, how cool. Even when I put down the camera, I was watching them and they're just there and they're moving. The wind is blowing, the dust and everything, debris is blowing up and hitting me, but I'm just watching them because of the movement. And they didn't look as if there was anything bothering them at all in all of that wind and all of that movement. And I think for me, that's resilience in action. Really, you can, and we can sometimes get to certain places inside us where we are just centered and we are hopeful. We have a path forward. We're going to first lead ourselves and then be able to lead our teams, our colleagues, our families. We will inspire them to have the confident expectation of something good and to create a path forward, the path forward that leads to resilience and a resilient mindset. We don't like adversity, but it serves also a purpose. We need to normalize it. And then we also need to get proximate to the people that we serve, to the people that we lead, to our communities. We need to understand in some ways the nuances for making our decisions. We need to get a much better perspective of things. And then we also need to live also to inspire others, not just to tell people what to do. We're not always in control, but we can always inspire others by our life. And so I shared with you this quote, and I will share it again as I end this talk. Listen to the mustn'ts, child. Listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, and then listen close to me. Anything is possible, child. Anything can be. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference today.
Thank you, June, for that inspiring session. Before we launch into our presentation on resiliency, we're going to move into our stretch break. So I invite everybody to stay for the next 15 minutes as I lead us through some stretches. And I'm Sandra Shacklin. So hold on, we actually are going to do our stretches standing. So I invite you all to stand with me and take a break. We're going to shift our perspective a little. I know we all spend so much time sitting. And so hopefully you'll be able to take away some of these stretches with you and bring them back into your work life. So if you prefer to sit, I will mention you can certainly do most of these stretches sitting as well. But I know I happen to like to get up and stretch my legs. So before I get started, just a few reminders. just please listen to your body. If you're feeling any discomfort as we're stretching, maybe ease back or just wait until we move on to the next stretch that might feel a little bit better for you. And then I'll just say I've noticed lots of women wearing still professional clothing. So if for some reason you're wearing professional clothing on the bottom with your heels, I might suggest taking your shoes off if appropriate, so that you can make sure that you balance as we're taking our stretch break. So I'm going to ask everybody to stand hip distance apart, so about this wide apart with your feet, facing your camera. And feel your feet firmly planted to the earth. Weight evenly distributed between the front and the back of your foot. Just finding that steadiness. And inhale and exhale. And focus on your breath for just a moment. Scan your body, just noticing any tension and how you're feeling in this moment. And what we're going to focus on during our stretch break today, I'm actually going to focus on start with our hands and our wrists and work our way to our head and our shoulders. And we'll finish up by doing a stretch in our legs. So let's start with our hand and our wrists. So first, actually our fingers. This is one thing we don't think about, but think about all the time you spend clicking that mouse. So open and close your fist and stretch out those fingers. Really stretching them out, wiggling them. A part of our body that we don't pay much attention to, but right, we use our hands so often. Then make a gentle fist. And let's just twist our wrists, right? So spin them around and switch directions. So you're going the opposite way. And release. And bring your hands out in front of you. Face your palms towards your computer as if you're telling me to stop. Pushing through the heel of your hand, you should feel a nice stretch in your wrist and maybe even underneath your forearm. Continue to push out. Yep, and I see somebody also intensifying the stretch by pressing on their hands. You can try that as well if you're not feeling anything. And then release and bring it so your palms are facing each other with your thumbs up. Make a gentle fist again with resting your thumbs on top of your fist and turn your knuckles towards each other. And you feel a nice stretch in your forearm there. That's the part I think that often gets tight from all of our computer and office work. And while you're doing this, continue to breathe. Sometimes we hold our breath when stretching. So just check in with yourself, inhaling and exhaling. So release your hands. You can feel free to shake your arms out. And let's bring our attention to our shoulders. We actually, I don't know if you're like me, the busier I get, the more my shoulders start to kind of rise throughout the day as I think I hunch over. So just notice, is your shoulder close to your ears? Maybe lower them a little. Feel them relaxing onto your back. And then shrug up and shrug down and do a few shoulder shrugs. Bringing those shoulders up to your ears and then notice them relaxing. And then circle back with that motion, right? So notice your shoulders pushing back, opening up that front chest. Then I invite you to place your hands on your shoulders and let your elbows guide you as you make big circles with those elbows, stretching even a different part of your shoulders. Two more times. We're all going at our own pace, and release those arms. Bring your arms out to the side. And what I like to call this is cactus arms, but they also kind of look like field posts. So 90-degree bend in your elbows. And for some of us, we might feel a stretch across our chest but just by doing this. If not, push your elbows just a little bit back towards your wall. And that should really deepen that stretch. Continuing to inhale, right? Focus on that breath, having it go throughout your body. Now release those arms, and we're actually going to give ourselves a hug. Bring your arms out to the side, and let's start with our left arm underneath our right arm and give ourselves a nice hug. You may have noticed that my arms are a little long, so I'm very easily able to hit my shoulders, but if you can't, it's okay if you're only touching, your upper arm. And hug yourself tight, push into your arms, and you should feel a nice stretch in your upper back. And let's release and switch. So the opposite arm is along the bottom, because that's going to feel a little bit different. And you might even notice that this side is a little bit tighter, or maybe you can't hug yourself as tightly as you did on the other side, but that's okay. Sometimes one side of our body is a little bit different than the other. So let's release those arms. Feel free to shake them out. And let's move to our neck. Hopefully everybody has their computer set up for the best ergonomics, but I often find that our neck and our upper shoulders is a place where we sometimes hide stress. So just check to make sure that you're standing up straight, your feet are planted, arms are at your side. Inhale and feel lengthening through the top of your head, so you're standing your tallest. And then slowly tilt that chin towards your chest. And feel that stretch behind the back of your neck. Return to center, so you're gazing straight ahead, and place your left hand on the top of your head. And slowly guide your head towards the left side. I know I feel this stretch just doing that, but if for some reason you're not feeling that stretch, just notice your opposite shoulder. You may need to release that, or even if you extend your arm out to the side, that can help deepen that stretch. And return to center, and let's switch hands. So take that right hand and place it on the top of your head. Guide your neck slowly to the left, or your head slowly to your left. Release that shoulder on the opposite side. And perhaps try extending your arm, shooting energy through your fingertips. That will help deepen that stretch. Guide your head back toward the center and release your arms. So now let's focus on the side of our body, right? We haven't at all addressed our side body. So first we're going to do a few just stretches up and down with our hands. So bring your arms up as you inhale and then down as you exhale. And let's repeat this several times. Inhale. Exhale. One more time. Inhale. And this time, let your arms rest here at the top. And you have a choice. You can have your palms touch each other, or you can clasp your hands and keep one finger up. And extend upward towards your fingertips. Engage your belly button just to keep your core solid and to protect your lower back. And just feel that energy shooting up through your body as you lift. And now let's slowly lean to the left side. Being careful to keep that right foot planted. And you can feel a nice stretch along your side body, all the way down into your hips. On your inhale, breathe into your side body even. And then let's return to center. We'll pause here for a breath. And inhale and exhale. And let's shift to the opposite side. Checking in to make sure that left foot is grounded and feel that stretch along your side body. And return to center and have your arms return to your side. Let's add a little twist. Let's get that spine moving a little because a lot of our attention has been focused on facing forward. So we're going to add, so we're going to raise our arms up, but on the exhale, we're going to turn to the side. And then the inhale, return to center. And on the exhale, return to the opposite side. And just repeat this motion. So as you inhale, you're in the center, and exhale, alternate sides. It's a great way to line up our breath with some stretch and some movement. One more on each side. Return to center and bring your hands back down to your side. So let's do one full body stretch where you raise your hands back up and just stretch through your fingertips. And if you're standing, you may even want to stand on your tiptoes, feeling that nice long stretch. If you're sitting in your chair, just ground in your sit bones and extend through those fingertips. Bring your hands back down to your side. And I want to finish up by doing a nice stretch for our hamstring. So I'll give you two choices. You can rest your hands on your desk. I'm going to actually rest it on the side of my chair just so that you can see it, because otherwise it might be difficult. So I'm resting my hands on the chair and I'm just doing a gentle forward bend. And I suggest you bend your knees a little, and you're going to keep your upper body straight and bend at your hips and just rest your hands on the chair or on your desk. And this should give you a nice stretch in the back of your hamstrings. This is an area that gets really tight throughout the day as we're sitting. Return to your standing position. And let's face forward. And let's end our stretching the way we started. Just focusing on the breath. So that inhale and exhale. And just scan your body. Noticing any changes or anything different related to our stretches today. It may have brought your attention to some tension, but hopefully now you're feeling a little bit more relaxed. So thank you for joining me for that quick stretch break. So I'm going to get started in just a minute. You have probably a minute or so to get resituated at your desk as I put my presentation up, because I'm actually going to be doing the next talk as well. So, now that you've all moved around a bit and you got your blood flowing, we're going to be focusing on resiliency once again. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why it matters for your health and your productivity. So just a minute or two while I work to get my PowerPoint set up. It'll give everybody a chance to refocus and regroup. Thank you for all the positive comments about the stretching. I wish I took more time during my workday to get up and stretch like that. I'm going to make a mental note today to add that to my lunch break. So with that said, I'm going to get started talking a little bit more about resiliency. And I think this is going to be a great follow-up to our conversation earlier. Lots of great information today around this topic. And one of the interesting things I think about the pandemic is it's really brought mental health to the forefront. And we're hearing more and more about ways to help improve our emotional health. And resilience is such an important part of that conversation. As families and communities are all looking at ways to improve or even maintain our emotional well-being, especially in response to everything that's happening around us. Over the last year, we've seen an impact on people both physically and emotionally related to the pandemic, but also other things happening around us, like natural disasters, concerns related to racial inequality, and even the recent election, causing just so much uncertainty and stress for many of us. So I'm going to start off today talking a little bit about how our mental health is being impacted. And then we're going to look more closely at resilience, a study that Cigna did to help identify what's happening in the space of resilience, but also why it's so important. And just to give you a little background about myself, I am a licensed clinical social worker. So I certainly have a clinical background, and I support a lot of our behavioral initiatives and conversations. So as you can imagine, resilience is something that I'm talking about so much more often than in the past. So first, let's look at what we're seeing, as far as prevalence with behavioral health conditions. And so the data you're seeing up here is actually pre-COVID. So before the pandemic, we were seeing 1 in 5 adults struggling with a mental illness in any given year. 8% had a substance use disorder, and 19% were living with anxiety disorders. But what we're seeing following the pandemic is an increase in mental health issues. 30% of adults are reporting symptoms of an anxiety disorder. Depression has increased, so 1 in 4 adults are struggling with depression. And certainly we're seeing an increase in the use of alcohol use, most likely as people are trying to find better ways to manage stress and anxiety. So that number, that 1 in 5 that we were seeing of people struggling with a mental health disorder is shifting closer to 1 in 4, and perhaps even 1 in 3 as we continue to go throughout the year. So I know there's a lot of lines on this graph. We're going to focus on the wave 1 and wave 2. The first wave probably looks very familiar to most of you on the call because this was the first wave that we were looking at about a year ago when we were looking at the pandemic and the number of cases of COVID. And we heard over and over, okay, let's flatten that curve. This is what we can do to flatten the curve. I want to bring your attention to this orange curve here. And this is the second wave, which focuses on mental health conditions. And notice how that curve emerged as we saw the COVID curve starting to go down. And this is all, this is looking at last year. And that's because there's often a delay in individuals accessing care for mental health issues. But as I mentioned, we're seeing an increase in prevalence of anxiety and depression, but there's also concerns around other issues, exposure to trauma, burnout of our healthcare professionals. We're also seeing people struggle with stress, loneliness, and grief. And when those types of issues are left untreated or unaddressed, this can lead to more serious mental health problems. So I think one of the concerns is that we often see people delay getting treatment, as I mentioned, and this can lead to more serious issues or an exacerbation of their current symptoms. So one of the conversations I think that's happening more and more is, how do we flatten this curve? Because notice how this curve stays high for quite a long time. We're expecting the impact of the pandemic on mental health conditions to continue into this year and maybe even next year based on other similar events. So the focus to flatten the curve really shifts to prevention and awareness and even early identification. And I think when we're talking about prevention, it really ties in so nicely to this conversation of resilience, because the more awareness and the more we focus on resilience, the better people are going to be able to handle difficult situations as they arise. So before I move on and start talking about resilience, I wanted to just check in with everyone, and we're going to do our first polling question. So this is an anonymous poll question, and I want to check in with you. Over the last few weeks, have you had any concerns related to your stress or anxiety? So I'm going to give just a few, a little bit more time to give everybody a chance to answer, and let's share those results. So I'll say I love to add this question to my presentation to just check in with people. And yes is always the most frequent answer. And we saw 80% of people that were polled today identified that yes, over the last few weeks, they had some concerns related to stress or anxiety. And 17% said no, and 2% weren't sure. Maybe they weren't sure of what type of, what their experience was like. So certainly, this is something that's impacting most of us, whether it's ourselves individually or maybe somebody in our workforce or in our family. So the topic of resilience becomes so important when we start seeing rates of stress and anxiety as high as they are. So I'm going to challenge you for a moment to stop and think of a colleague or maybe someone in your personal life who seems very resilient, right? They're the epitome of resilience. What are some of their qualities? And just think this to yourself, and we'll see how they line up with what I'm going to talk about. So I know when I think of resilience, I think of a person that's faced with adversity, bounces back. But there's a lot of other qualities related to resilience. A person who doesn't give up. When faced with a difficult situation or faced with fear, they seek solutions. So they kind of move into that action mode. They're able to quickly pivot and adapt to what's happening around them. And then, of course, a lot of times we see a person who has high self-esteem, that level of confidence, and they're easily able, or at least on the outside, they appear to manage stress and whatever is thrown their way. So I think one of the interesting things about resiliency is that we're all born with the capacity to be resilient, and it's something that we can grow or build upon. One of the key things, though, with resilience is it's impacted by several things, right? So I can feel very resilient in one situation and maybe a year later faced with another adverse event and maybe feel not quite as resilient. And one of those things that impacts resilience is the volume of stress. So when you think about all the stress we've been facing, whether it's balancing family and work, managing safety precautions, physical distancing, and limited social interactions, or maybe just pivoting from working from home back to the office or vice versa, right? Adjusting your work environment. You can see why you might feel as if your resources are depleted and perhaps you haven't been able to bounce back as you typically do, or maybe you're even seeing this with people in your family. Other areas that may also be impacting resilience are our vulnerabilities and our strengths both. So first, looking at vulnerabilities. An example of a vulnerability can be a physical or mental health issue, right? Because that impacts our ability to bounce back. Can also be exposure to a traumatic event. And that's certainly one of the concerns with the pandemic is people have been exposed to traumatic events, perhaps who've never been before. When looking at strengths, they can be personality traits like a person who's just very persistent, or maybe a sense of humor. But then also it goes back to supports. You know, supports we have like friends and family, and that feeling of connectedness that was mentioned earlier. So resilience, in my mind, is really such an important skill for navigating life. And we all know it's been tested in so many ways over the last year, which is why we wanted to really take a closer look at resilience itself and better understand it. So Cigna actually did a resilience study, and it's actually a landmark study in partnership with the Resilience Research Center. And our Resilience Index is a multi-arm study of over 16,000 school-age children, their parents, young adults, and working adults. And this study was done via online. It was online with a 17-item questionnaire. And it was actually last August, so August 2020. So several months in to stay-at-home orders and some of the changes we've all experienced over the last year. So I wanted to share just a little bit of the data, some of what we discovered to help, just share information and to provide you some insight of how resilience has been impacted. So first, we found that resilience overall is at risk for 3 in 5 Americans. So think about that, 60% of Americans who were surveyed were struggling to bounce back from the challenges they were facing. So when I first saw this number, I'll admit I was very surprised. But then I started to think about all the things that I've talked about today, about what impacts resilience and all the change that has entered my life over the last year. And something as simple as even having connections at work, right? Those conversations where you connect with your colleagues, how are you doing in your weekend, all had an impact. So this number made more sense to me, especially knowing it took place in August. So today I'm going to take a quick look at what we're seeing related to children and families. And then I'm going to transition and share a little bit of information about what we're noticing in the workforce. So when looking specifically at resilience in children, I want to bring your attention to this upside down, this U or upside down rainbow. And what we see is children are most resilient between ages 5 and 10. But as children enter their early teenage years into young adult years, you see a drop in resilience. And then as you move from young adulthood back up to parents, to being a parent, that resiliency starts to build up again. I found this to be very interesting. But then I started thinking about, what it's like to be a teenager, right? This preteen years, if you have a preteen, or a teenager, this is when you start to figure out where you fit into the world. It's a time of learning, you're building skills, you're trying to navigate your peer group and how to fit in. And you can even see this on the left here about that feeling of fitting in and how that's impacted, right? So the children ages 5 to 10 had the lowest rate of not fitting in. So thinking 29% of children felt they fit in with other children only sometimes or not at all. And that number of not feeling like you belong increases into young adulthood, where it was 54%, but then it drops again as we move around to parents. And so it does get you thinking as an adult, what can I do? And I think it's just important to remind ourselves the role we play and how we can support children at this time. So whether we're a parent, a teacher, a coach, or even a community leader, we play a critical role. So if we can help build skills early, help them learn how to cope and grow through challenges, it can really help to get our teenagers, our adolescents, our children on a positive trajectory that will carry through the rest of their lives. So let's change gears and look at what we're seeing among workers. And I actually have a snapshot of what we specifically saw related to government workers, where we saw that approximately 1/3 of government workers have high resilience. So, that means two out of three are struggling. And I think it's important to recognize that's not necessarily just related to the pandemic, but several areas of our lives were impacted last year, causing those increases in stress and anxiety. And we know when that's not addressed, it can lead to worsening health conditions in the future. So a couple of areas where we saw that increased stress and anxiety, specifically with government workers, were related to the deaths of Black Americans like George Floyd. So following that event last year, we saw 56% of government workers were experiencing stress and anxiety, right? So they're being impacted by those events related to racial inequality. But then if we pivot and we look at some of the secondary side effects, I like to call them, from the pandemic, so not the fear of necessarily catching COVID-19 or having a family member catch COVID-19, but some of the other areas of our lives that were impacted, we also see high levels of stress and anxiety. So many parents were working from home and also caring for their children. So we saw 58% had stress and anxiety related to homeschooling their child during the pandemic. And this is something I heard often when I was out talking. It's just finding that balance and still, managing to get your work done was challenging. And the last area that we looked at was related to economic uncertainty. And I'll tell you, I was a clinician for many years, and the number one stressor that parents faced was related to financial hardship, right? The concerns that they couldn't provide for their family. So this is not surprising to me at all, that 69% of government workers were stressed by the current economic uncertainty, right? Not knowing what was going to happen with their job or their finances. We saw lots of businesses closing down, just related, even if it's just temporarily related to some of the guidelines related to physical distancing. So this provides a really nice snapshot of what we're seeing with government workers. But even employment status had an impact on resilience. And what we saw was that full-time workers were the most resilient. But as we move from full-time employment to part-time, all the way down to unemployment or, and laid off workers, we saw a sharp decrease or maybe a gradual decrease in resilience levels, with laid off workers having the lowest levels of resilience. And perhaps that, is related to some of the economic issues that we were talking about or financial issues. But I think it's important to call out that even, the highest level, the full-time workers, that's only a little bit over 1 in 3 full-time workers were considered to be highly resilient. So there's still a large percentage of the workforce that's not feeling as resilient as they should. So let's take a closer look at what we found helps to grow resilience, right? So if you're looking to grow that resilience muscle or to bring your resilience, to improve it, here are some of the other results that we noticed. And it's the relationship between our mental and physical health and resilience. So, we've all been talking for years more and more about the importance of a holistic approach to health. So we know medical and mental health issues don't happen to isolation. They often occur together. So it wasn't really a surprise to me that either one of these can have an impact on your resilience. So I'm going to ask you just to take another moment here and to think about when you're feeling your best. So maybe you feel like you can take on anything. And what are some of the things that are happening around you that might promote that feeling? And just pause and think about it to yourself. I can share with you, for me, I know that I'm getting a good night's sleep and I'm also exercising regularly. So those are two of the things that usually when I'm feeling my best are a part of my daily life. And we'll look a little bit more closely at that, but a little bit later in our conversation, but a few of the areas that really were correlating with higher resilience were daily exercise, family time, me time, and stress reduction activities. Right, so stress reduction activities might be mindfulness, breathing exercise, yoga. Me time is ensuring you have time with yourself. And that family time could be with your immediate family, but maybe even your extended family. And I think that really goes back to kind of our theme today, the importance of connection. And we know all these things, right? If you start thinking about what helps with physical health and mental health, we know all these things also have an impact on those areas as well. So let's look at our data here. For physical health, we found that full-time workers with good or better physical health were more resilient than those with fair or poor physical health. And pretty significant, right? A 30-point difference between the two. Then looking at mental health, very similar results. 40% was the rate of resilience, for full-time workers with good or better mental health. And this was significantly higher, once again, than those with poor mental health. So very good data, I think, to support the importance of focusing on these areas. So we talked a little bit about the impact of resilience on emotional health. Now I want to talk a little bit about how it may impact your place of employment, so your business, your organization. And, certainly employees that have low resilience, it does transcend into the workplace, right? It has an impact there. So first, we found less resilient workers had a few types of things happening at work. One, lower job satisfaction. And this leads to higher turnover, right? If you're not happy at your job, it may cause you to leave. And it has an impact on performance, right? So if you like to perform well at work and you're struggling with stress and anxiety, it's very likely going to have an impact on that performance. And in the end, impact possibly your ambition. We talked a little bit before about the impact on self-worth and self-esteem, and that will also carry over into the workplace, right? So you might feel less confident with your work and the decisions you're making there. And then lastly, weaker relationships. So thinking about your relationships with colleagues, how you interact with them, it can really have an impact in the workplace as well. And I guess the way I like to think about it is, resilient workers are more likely to show up, and I mean that kind of mentally show up, be present, and perform well. They're going to be more likely to take on tasks and responsibilities. So if I was a manager, these are the people that I would want on my team. And if I was an employee, this is the type of employee that I would want to be, because this is how you're going to be successful at work. I think the good news here is that if you are noticing that you're struggling with resilience, there are things we can do even to help support in the workplace, right? Keeping in mind we spend 90,000 hours across a lifespan at work. So having that positive culture can really have such a meaningful impact on overall well-being. What I often find when looking at the workplace is that there's already many activities already occurring that can help build resilience. So let's take a quick look at that. So our second poll question is, are any of the following types of activities being promoted by your organization? So we have physical activity, activities that promote social connection, activities promoting inclusivity, and then 2 or more, because your organization may be doing several of these areas. And we'll just give you a little bit of time to respond to this. I appreciate all the thought people are putting in to answering the question, because I know you have to think back of what does your organization offer. Okay. So what we're seeing, and this makes me so happy, D was the most common answer, 2 or more of the above. So over 50% of you designated that your organization is doing at least 2 of the activities, whether it's physical, social, or activities promoting inclusivity. I really want to also call out, so if looking at the individual, A, B, and C, physical activity had the highest rate as well, 25%. So certainly gives us a little bit of insight. And I think as we move on and look, you know, at the next bit of information I have, this really kind of helps level set as to where a lot of organizations are. So these are just some examples of what we found of the type of activities or support that helps build resilience. And, you know, we found there's this strong connection between resilience, strong mental and physical health, as I mentioned, but having access to tools and resources, and even staying connected socially and being surrounded by a diverse community. So as I said, we already know that several of these things are happening in your workplace, right? So holistic health, once again, is helping employees have that good work-life balance. I think the biggest challenge that I hear when I'm out talking is really about that social connectivity at work, right? It's more challenging, and I'll tell you right now, if you would have spoken to me a year and a half ago, I would have been promoting in-person, face-to-face social interactions. But we know that in many situations, that's not possible. So any creative ways to help promote social connectivity, you know, as an organization or as an individual, I think it's important to recognize even small steps can make a difference. Like a 15-minute virtual coffee break so you can connect with some of your colleagues may be more valuable than you realize. And just finding that right balance of, you know, managing your virtual fatigue, or I think what they're calling it is Zoom fatigue, but also ensuring that you still stay connected. You know, certainly one of the things in the last year that has really, I think, expanded is our conversation about diversity and having an inclusive workplace. So here, certainly hearing more and more of initiatives in this area. And it's something just to keep in mind that the more diverse our social interactions are, the more varied supports we'll have to draw from when a crisis occurs. So when we are struggling, it's nice to have a wide range of people to help support us because we all bring our own experiences. And then looking at the last few here, I think that transparent two-way communication is so important. So I do want to just spend a moment talking about this. You know, as an employee, just ensuring that you take advantage of having conversations with your managers, take advantage of town hall meetings to talk with your leadership, Ask questions about return to work, share your concerns, help yourself be informed, because that is going to help manage your stress and anxiety. Technology, certainly, I've kind of talked a little bit about that with social connection, but just finding that right balance, right? When we're using technology to help build those social connections, it can help with resilience or to help with that communication. And then lastly, access to resources and tools. And I'm going to spend a little bit wrapping up today talking about what are some good resources that you may have access to help build resilience, but making sure you're aware of them. Participate possibly in an employee resource group, an ERG, to help feel, once again, that feeling of connected, but to make the most of the resources in your workplace. So I'm going to change gears and just spend a few minutes talking about a tool that we developed that you can use when faced with adversity or faced with a challenge, because it can be really helpful to have an action plan, right? If you wait until you're faced with adversity and then you try to think about how to respond, sometimes it's a little bit more challenging. So this is our Grow Further action plan. And G starts with ground yourself in the situation. And really that's, think about the situation and identify your ideal outcome and write it down. It helps you stay focused on, and bringing your attention to what is going to bring you to the result you want. R, recognize what you can control, right? And this is kind of I think the hard part with all that's been happening around us is there's so much that's out of our control. And it's pretty easy to focus on our attention on those things which we can't change. So recognize what you can control and commit to one thing you can tackle today. And this can be the smallest thing, right? Identify a resource, identify a person you want to contact to help you achieve your ideal outcome. But even if you achieve one small step, you're moving forward and getting closer to that ideal outcome. And O is organize the resources you need. So what do I need to get to that ideal outcome? Start there. And then W, work with your community for support, right? We all have a wide range of resources that we can draw from, and remind yourself that asking for help is a sign of strength. And I think this can be especially challenging in the workplace to admit that you're struggling or that you might need support, but you might be surprised at the responses of your colleagues and how they might be having similar experiences as well. So just want to focus on a few more resources that you might have available as an individual and that you may want to look into yourself. First, there's been a huge expansion in response to all that's happened in the last year with digital and virtual tools, right? I like to think about it as, they were slowly growing, but it was like you added Miracle-Gro and everything just really started blossoming. So your organization may have some digital tools to help grow your emotional well-being. And I like to think this is almost as preventative, right? What are some things I can do to better cope? What are some things I can do to manage anxiety or just to be the best person I can be? And I'll just use Hackify as an example because I happen to be familiar with them. This is focused on positive psychology. It's an app. It's been around for years. It's self-guided, you take small quizzes, but it really focuses on increasing resilience and mindfulness, stress reduction, things like that. So even if Hackify isn't available to you through your workplace, it's certainly available in, for purchase or to use to anyone in the App Store. But, your organization may have a similar program. I hear more and more about organizations providing support for mindfulness and having resources to help with that. So lots of things. So I would explore that if you're just looking for something different. And I think it's great when you can do things on your own, especially to help improve that emotional health. And then I just love EAP, and probably because I'm a clinician, but your Employees Assistance Program plays such an important role in resilience, right? I often think of prevention when I think of these type of programs. as an individual, right, as an employee, your employee assistance program, especially if you have a full service program, is going to provide free face-to-face counseling. So if you start to feel stress and you start to feel anxiety, the sooner you learn how to manage that, the better your outcome. And most providers have virtual options now, or at least there are providers that provide virtual care. So there's lots of different options. So you don't have to actually go into a therapy office. You can do it from your office or from your home. The other thing is we talked about concerns with finances and childcare. And these are the services that are often most overlooked with employee service programs. There's resources to help with that work-life balance. And so most EAP programs can help you identify childcare providers in your community. They vet them to ensure that they're available. They also have educational materials, and it's not uncommon to have financial consultations available either to help address any financial concerns. If you're a manager and you're trying to think of better ways to manage your own stress and anxiety, but also you want to support employees as well, the EAP has lots of resources, to help you as a manager, sometimes manager training, but also manager consultations are also available. So if you're concerned about an employee, you can also speak with an EAP professional to talk about how you want to approach them. How concerned should you be based on what you're noticing? So support for you to help with your well-being, but also to help you better manage the well-being of your employees. And then just lastly, if you're a leader at your organization, the EAP can support that as well. Look at your reporting. What are some of the issues that employees are struggling with? How can I address that? I see that parenting, a lot of calls are being made into the EAP about parenting. Well, maybe I want to highlight those services to my employee population. They also provide wellness seminars in many cases, as well as critical incident in case any kind of traumatic event happens in the workplace. So lots of great information here. I want to wrap up our discussion today just to encourage you to familiarize yourself with the resources available at your organization or that you might have available to your family, whether it's a fitness challenge to help improve your physical health or to familiarize yourself better with the EAP. Just a reminder, there's just so many resources out there to help build your own resilience, but also to support the resilience of your team. So I'm going to stop there and just pause for a moment just to see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Sandra. I do see some questions. Some folks in the chat are asking if there's a way to get a copy of this presentation. So I just want to add that we will have the recording available as well by the end. After the session ends, we'll work on editing the audio and video, and we'll have that available online when everything's done.
Sure, and I will mention if you're interested, especially in the data and the Grow tool, there is a public website, cignaresilience.com, where all of this information is available. So there's some little short videos and all sorts of information, including if you wanted to take a resilience quiz yourself, take the survey yourself, there's a quiz there available as well. But we can also look into the presentation as well.
Are there any other questions? We do have some time. If someone would like to speak up, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Somebody just put the website. I was about to type it, but I see Erica's helping me out, and she just put the website in the chat.
Looks like there's a question that's come in. What approach do you use with more traditional work cultures where mostly men don't feel comfortable addressing this issue because they have been taught to not whine or need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question, because I think it can be a challenge. The one thing that I will just tell you that I think that most people can relate to is stress. So if you were looking to provide education on anything, the stigma around stress itself has seemed to really diminish over the last few years. So focusing on that aspect is a great way to kind of, I think, help people, right? It's something that's more relatable for everyone. So that might be a way to backdoor. The one thing that I would say is that often when I'm talking about mental health issues, I don't go out. I find that if I'm talking about depression or more serious mental health issues, people don't want to ask questions because there's still that little bit of stigma. So I often try that approach of focusing on stress. But, keeping in mind also that, there's other ways to help with resilience. So it might be fitness related, right? As opposed to diving deep on the emotional aspect or even social connectivity. Great question.
It looks like we missed a question earlier about being resilient and standing up for yourself compared to when it's appropriate to walk away. Can you talk a little more about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, and it's funny because I do think even when you use the pandemic as an example and physical guidelines, there's lots of differing views on even how you want to navigate physical distancing. So I think it's important to kind of find that balance where you feel like you can share your thoughts and opinions. But if you are noticing that people are not responsive, or maybe they are being a little more aggressive in their response, you have to really kind of take a step back and really assess whether continuing to be outspoken is really in your best interest. So I think it's going to vary from situation to situation, where you just need to kind of assess, is there really an advantage for me to continue on this? And is it worth some of the stress and anxiety that it's causing me? But I think it's always important, if you feel, to express your opinion or to feel like you can. It's just a matter of, not everybody, unfortunately, is willing or open to hear what we have to say.
Someone in the chat noted that there are also some cultures that don't even want to discuss mental health issues. Is it also a matter of using stress as the way to navigate the conversation?
I'm sorry, Laura, can you repeat that?
Is it also a matter of using stress as a way to navigate a conversation, especially in cultures where it's not so normalized?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, so it sounds like the person's asking, is stress a good way also to introduce it maybe in a culture where there might be more stigma associated with mental health issues. And I still do think that stress is something that is very relatable, but, I think it brings up a very good point that we need to take culture into account. I think one of the one of the things we can do is just continue to focus on awareness, right? Is to focus on just
I'm sorry, Sandra, we've lost audio with you. Are you?
Sandra, we can't hear you. Not sure if your AirPods have died.
We can't hear you. We think maybe your AirPods have maybe gone out. But we are at the top. No, we still can't hear you.
Well, it looks like we're at time anyway.
Yes, we are.
So thank you so much, Sandra, for a really great workshop on resiliency. And thank you again, Cigna, for sponsoring this wonderful event. To recap our day, we talked about the differences between a coach, a mentor, and an advocate. June Mighty discussed how to become leaders of hope. We learned to identify stressors and how to strengthen our resiliency and minimize our own health impacts. If you'd like to continue the conversation, we have 3 different breakout rooms to connect with your peers for the next 60 minutes. So if you go back to your home screen for the event, click on schedule and then continue the conversation. There is 3 different breakout rooms. So room 1 is well-being, self-care, and mindfulness. In this breakout room, Kim and Sandra from Cigna will be on hand to answer questions about major stressors and managing stress. In room 2 is women in leadership. Connect with other attendees and share what you found inspiring and thought-provoking. Kelly and Kimberly from the League of Women in Government will lead the discussion and continue the conversation on gender balance and gender diversity. In room 3 is connecting through coaching. Rebecca and Rob from ICMA will discuss the ICMA coach program, including the free Coach Connect platform to help you grow and achieve your career goals. So again, thank you so much to Cigna. Thank you all for being here on International Women's Day, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.